Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is a special Saturday edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610. Good to be with you. Hope you're having a great weekend. Just got done moments ago from leaving NRG Stadium for Texans practice number 8 of training camp and of the preseason, and we got a lot of observations to get to from that. Before we do that, a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button on this podcast if you are looking forward to getting the updates from training camp. There will be no update tomorrow because there's no practice. Monday and Tuesday, they're practicing again. So there are post-practice updates and reports that I plan on doing on the podcast here for both of those practices. So hit the subscribe button so you get them automatically and you don't have to worry about seeking them out. So appreciate that. Tell a friend as well to subscribe. That would be good. That's how we grow this thing in this awesome year of Texans football. So that administrative work out of the way. A quick reminder as well, if you want to send an email to the show for our Tuesday mailbag episode, HOU mailbag at gmail.com. HOU mailbag at gmail.com is the email address. So just finished up out at Texans training camp, and it was another wet one today. Another practice that DeMeco Ryans chose to have the team stay outside and practice in the rain. So this is 2 practices in a row where they've chosen to work in the rain and get some work in some adverse conditions. So that was good to see. It lent itself to some sloppiness out there at practice today. But I would say overall the sloppiness was more conventional football sloppiness from the rain and whatnot, and from the defense kind of imposing its will on the offense again, as opposed to the sloppiness of Friday, which was a lot of people jumping off sides and false starts and pre-snap penalties and procedural things. Friday was just this was actually some good football played out there. It's just that the offense probably lost the day. The defense, I think, won the day out there today, which I have no problem seeing that. I'm not worried about this offense one bit. I think they're going to be great. It's good to see the defense actually winning some of these reps and winning some of the days out there. I feel really, really confident about that. We'll get into some of the specific observations, including a bit of a scare with CJ Stroud in a little bit here in a few minutes. As far as kind of capturing the mood and the vibe out at camp, I got there today at about 8:15. Normally I'm getting there at 5:30 in the morning on weekdays because of my radio show. But I got out there today about 8:15, and the line to get into practice, I have never seen this in all the years I've covered the Texans, the line being this long to get into a rainy, messy, sloppy Texans practice. They were lined up across the street, going across the street of Merworth, and then down the sidewalk of Merworth, kind of heading, I guess that would be heading west on Merworth. Like it was almost a full city block, a full block between Kirby and whatever that next street over is of people lined up. It was, I'm probably doing a pretty bad job of depicting it without having a map that I can point to, but it's just understand, like, this was a crazy amount of people. And then once they all got in, and I'm assuming they all got in, the entire bleachers were full. The entire standing room area just north of the north end of the practice field, the end zone there, that was all full. The NFL Network was in town because today is like welcome back day for the NFL. The Texans and Bears have already been practicing for like a week, but most of the NFL has just gotten back into training camp within the last couple of days. So the first Saturday, when most of the teams are coming back to training camp, the NFL Network does their sort of welcome back thing, and they bump around all the different training camps around the country. I thought it was interesting that the 2 people the NFL Network sent in terms of TV personalities to cover the Texans were Steve Wyche, who is very, very good on there, and then Pep Hamilton, who was very, very poor as the Texans offensive coordinator a couple of years ago. Now, some of Pep covering the Texans may have had to do with his knowledge of some of the guys on the team, although most of the guys that matter on this team were not around when Pep Hamilton was around. But number 2, it's probably geography. I think Pep still makes his home here in the Houston area. He's got a son who's a very good high school player. And Texas is probably a pretty good place for him to apply his high school trade. So I think Pep still lives around here. I don't know if he listens to the radio. I wouldn't if I were him. but he was out there today. There was really no awkwardness. A lot of people from the Texans came up and said hello. He was, I'm sure very popular in the building there. He just didn't have a very good year in 2022 coordinating the Texans offense, but they were out there today. Big day around the league. And the Texans are, I think, one of the camps that most people outside of Houston are still pretty interested in for a couple of reasons. CJ Stroud, who we'll talk about here in just a minute. The Stephon Diggs, who we will also talk about here in just a minute. And also, the Texans are one of the only team that have had any sort of footage from their practice kind of leak onto the internet, because most of these teams haven't really practiced very much yet. So I think a lot of people probably saw the footage of the fight the other day where Derek Stingley Jr. pushed Dalton Schultz to the ground, and the kind of false narrative that Stephon Diggs somehow caused that fight probably got a lot of people intrigued about the Texans. So we'll see how that goes. As far as the practice itself, I mentioned sloppy conditions. I thought the defense won the day. There were a lot of plays made on defense, a few plays made on offense, and I like seeing the defense stepping up right now. So that's kind of my categorization, big picture. I think the biggest story to come from practice today for me was just a bit of a scare with CJ Stroud. He had his foot stepped on like the very first play of team drills, or very early in team drills. Foley Fatukasi, who is not someone you want stepping on your foot. He's a very heavy individual. And my guess is they were wearing spikes today because the grass was so wet to keep their footing. And so CJ got stepped square on his foot, and he was hopping around, limping a little bit, moving a little gingerly for a few reps. I thought he was moving slightly gingerly even as the practice wore on. A lot of my colleagues there I saw tweeting about it. They thought he was moving normally. I thought he was moving like 95% normally. There just seemed to be a little hitch. The bottom line is that after practice, CJ Stroud was doing all his normal post-practice things where he's getting extra work in, talking to people. And D'Amico Ryans, just as importantly, got up to the podium and said there's no concern about CJ Stroud and his foot. We should point out, CJ finished the rest of the practice. They had 2 or 3 more segments of team drills after that first one, and he participated in all of them. But it was just a reminder how quickly, like, boom, things can change for your team if that foot gets stepped on squarely or on the wrong bone or something like that. Then your season changes, So it was just a reminder of that. I think we're all hyped about the Texans and everything. And I think fully healthy, very confident that they can make a lot of noise this year. But man, you always got to be watching for the Grim Reaper lurking around the corner. I'm not talking about you, Foley Fatukasi. I don't think you're the Grim Reaper. I think your foot was close to being the Grim Reaper today, or your cleats were. But just normal football circumstance. So that's the thing. I think back to last preseason in Cincinnati, might have even been on the day where they were doing the bounce around NFL Network thing. But I just remember there being one of their early practices where Joe Burrow went down and he had to be carted off. And ultimately, Burrow was able to come back, but it was a slow comeback. He was not good the first 4 weeks of the season last year. And then the next 5 weeks, he was very good, including against the Texans. He put up good numbers that day, other than a couple of picks. And then he got hurt. He hurt his wrist, and he was done for the year. But I think back to that. I think it was a calf injury or a lower leg injury of some sort that Burrow suffered last year in training camp. And I remember putting myself in the shoes of a Bengals fan and like, man, you make all these grand plans, especially in our business in radio where you're the flagship, man. You're thinking about all the things, all the angles that you're going to be covering with this team. I mean, we've already got as a station our rooms reserved for New Orleans for the Super Bowl. We'll be going there anyways, even if the Texans don't make it. But just the mere making of reservations for New Orleans, when you have a good team, you start to fantasize a little bit, and all those fantasies can go up, boom, and smoke like that, just based on somebody stepping on a foot. Because I always think back with foot injuries, I always think back to Matt Schaub in 2011, and when Albert Haynesworth fell on his foot on a QB sneak in a game against the Buccaneers. And Schaub finished the game. He was limping around a little bit, but then once they got back to Houston, turns out he had a Lisfranc injury, and he was done for the year. And I think the Texans could have won the Super Bowl that year if Matt Schaub had stayed healthy. So got to keep your head on a swivel, man, with all these injuries and whatnot. But a little scare with CJ Stroud. I guess the real test to some degree will be, does he practice on Monday? Does whatever happened with his foot at practice today, is it something that swells up during the night or whatever the case may be? So hopefully not the case. I don't need to see CJ in the Hall of Fame game. I don't need to see CJ in the preseason, if I'm being 100% honest here. I think CJ can step on the field at Indianapolis in week 1 and perform just fine. As far as notes go from practice today, we'll run through these quickly. No Joe Mixon at practice today, but he was working out on the side field. So he's at least getting back to doing active things out there, and he was out there. Christian Harris, I believe, was out there. He definitely wasn't practicing again. I've seen Aaron Wilson report that it's a soft tissue injury with Christian Harris. I don't know why he wasn't out at practice at all early in camp. Eventually he'll take the podium when he's active again, when he's working out again, but he's not on a PUP list of any sort, Christian Harris, or any sort of injury list. Laramie Tunsil, once again, not practicing, working out off to the side. Andrew Beck, not practicing as well. He's not been on the field. He's not done much of anything. Really, I haven't watched Beck as much as I've watched Tunsil working out. But I bring up Beck because he needs to get back out there and start practicing, or else Troy Hairston's going to wind up being the fullback for this team when the season starts. Will Anderson Jr. Did not practice today. That appeared to be more, as of right now, I think it's more of a planned day off than it is an injury day off. I've watched Will pretty closely throughout camp, and I didn't see any indications yesterday that he was moving poorly or that he was favoring any sort of body part. So we'll see. If he's practicing Monday, then it turns out it was probably just a Veterans Day off. John Mechie back at practice today, and he looked good. He was really, he was cooking. I think he was back yesterday too, but he looked really good. As far as, and so that's a good segue. So I took attendance for all of you. That's what the attendance looked like at camp. As far as other notes from camp, the one-on-ones are really fun to watch between the cornerbacks, safety, so secondary guys, defensive backs, and against the pass catchers for this team. Really fun to watch because I don't know what these other teams are going to do to try to combat the combination of Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and Stephon Diggs. Because these three guys, I should say, and I'll throw Mechie in there too. He had a really good day, but particularly those top three, there's nobody that can cover these guys one-on-one. Like even Stingley looks good going against these guys, but they still win their fair share against him. I don't know what they're going to do. Tank Dell does things in these drills that don't look like human beings should be able to do them. Stephon Diggs does not need a whole lot of room to maneuver and make catches. There was a great play in one-on-ones today. CJ Stroud was at quarterback. Kamari Lassiter was the corner, and he was checking Stephon Diggs, and it was about as good a coverage as you can make for Lassiter. Unfortunately for him, it was the perfect throw and the perfect catch by Stephon Diggs. Diggs had a one-handed catch in one-on-one drills that was spectacular, and he did it coming right towards the bleacher crowd there, and so he showed off and dapped people up. People are enjoying Stephon Diggs, man. Like you feel him out there. You know what I mean? Like he's got a presence about him, not just with his teammates, but interacting with the fans and the media as well. So we'll see how that continues. We'll see when the season starts if he's getting his appropriate amount of targets, or if he's not, more, I guess, maybe more dramatically, if he's not getting the appropriate amount of targets. We'll see if that positivity holds up. I think he's going to have a huge year. I mean, he's had a huge camp so far. There's nothing about his game so far that would suggest that he's backsliding. I know statistically he backslid last season in the second half, and there's two schools of thought on that. One is, well, he's getting older. Maybe he just had a bad second half. The educated school of thought is they changed offensive coordinators middle of the year in Buffalo, and they just changed the way they went about things. They found a different way to go about things that was winning football games, and for whatever reason, that didn't include a ton of targets for Stephon Diggs, not nearly as many as he was getting in the first half of the season. But you feel Diggs out there, man. Defense continues to shine. Derek Stingley Jr. had another interception, this one off of C.J. Stroud, where he just broke on the route, intercepted it, probably would have been a pick six. Derek Stingley Jr. has been one of the 3 or 4 best players out there at camp, in my opinion. He's primed for a huge year. Speaking of Stingley, the one blight on his record in this training camp was him cheap-shotting Dalton Schultz to the ground in that spat that took place the other day between the offense and the defense. Schultz met with the media today. Cody Stutes of Houston Football, HOUfootball.com. Cody does a great job. Cody asked Schultz about that incident, and Schultz just kind of sloughed it off and said, that's football. Cody appropriately followed up and said, so there's no lingering hard feelings or anything like that. And Schultz shook his head and said, no. So whatever hatchet was going on appears to have been buried, and Dalton Schultz and Derek Stingley Jr. are buddies again, I guess. So Schultz shed some light on that. I stuck around for the Schultz presser and the D'Amico Ryans presser. I did not stick around for Dameon Pierce's press conference, but there's some footage that's emerged from it where he's had some really good answers. I know Landry Locker of the Locker Room YouTube asked Dameon a question about what he learned from last year, and Dameon gave a really long answer on it that was really, really good. So I'm going to go watch that full thing, but I would encourage you guys to go find it as well. This is just such a fun group to cover, and the press conferences are really, really good following these practices, including D'Amico Ryans. So that's about it from today. There wasn't a ton in terms of like spectacular plays from the 11 on 11. It was a pretty workmanlike, a lot of work in the running game, 11 on 11, and there would have been a ton of sacks if there were hitting of quarterbacks allowed. CJ Stroud and Tim Boyle and Davis Mills would have been spending a lot of time in the cold tub or the hot tub or whichever tub makes them feel better after practice if you were allowed to hit the quarterbacks, because this pass rush is going to be fearsome. All right, a reminder once again to subscribe to the podcast. Hit that subscribe button. You'll get it automatically. No episode tomorrow. I'll have a post-practice episode Monday and Tuesday this week and a mailbag episode on Tuesday as well. Feel free to send your emails to houmailbag@gmail.com. For my producer, Anthony Irwin. Damn, these podcasts, shredding my voice. For my producer, Anthony Irwin, who gets the podcast out to you guys in such a timely fashion. And for all of you for listening, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing the podcast with a friend. We continue to grow and grow and grow, and we love that. As I sit, if you're watching on the stream, with a crisp fire burning on my TV in the background, because it's a chilly 81 degrees outside right now. Just some hot cocoa and a TV with a fire on it makes me feel all warm inside. So again, thank you all for listening. I'll be back on Monday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you for listening to the Utopia Football Podcast.